I never imagined a quiet Saturday morning could turn into a nightmare. I was on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunlight hit the edge of my driveway, thinking about nothing more complicated than which music I'd play next. And then I saw them. A police car slowly rolling toward my house. I blinked, thinking maybe I had slept through a call or misread the date. But no, two officers stepped out looking serious, radios clipped to their shoulders, eyes scanning the driveway. And behind them, of course, was Karen. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, clipboard in hand, hair perfectly in place, smiling as though she owned the entire street. She was watching me, waiting for me to squirm. And I'll admit, for a split second, I felt that prick of irritation that comes when someone treats your home like a playground for their ego. The officer walked up and cleared his throat. "Sir, we received a complaint regarding your driveway." I raised an eyebrow. "A complaint?" Karen stepped forward, her smile widening. "Yes, it's non-compliant," she said, as though that word alone carried power. "It's blocking access, violating HOA code and—" I held up my hand. "Excuse me, that's my driveway. Nothing is blocking access. I poured this myself. No one else has the right to tell me what I can or cannot do here." She gasped like I had committed some terrible crime. The officers exchanged a glance, a silent, "Uh-oh, this is going to be awkward." Karen didn't back down. In fact, she took a step closer, pointing at a corner of my driveway like it was evidence of some unspeakable sin. "The HOA rules are clear. You have to remove it, or I will have no choice but to escalate." I blinked at her. "Escalate? You've already called the police. What's next, a SWAT team for a patch of concrete?" The first officer politely asked Karen to step aside so he could assess the situation. He walked up and examined the driveway. He measured the space with his eyes, looked around, then looked back at me. "Sir, it seems there's no violation here." Karen's expression faltered. I could almost see the panic flicker behind her eyes. She tried to regain control, adjusting her clipboard like a shield, opening her mouth to argue, but the officer held up his hand. "Ma'am, we've got this under control." Her face twisted into a fake smile. "I just want to make sure everyone follows the rules," she said, voice sharp. "Rules are important. They keep the neighborhood safe and orderly." I wanted to laugh. I almost did. So the rule is that a person can't enjoy their own property. The officers were patient, professional. They asked me a few questions, confirmed my ownership, and politely informed Karen that the driveway was fine. She muttered something about further action, which sounded more like a threat than a plan. The police finally left, lights off, leaving only the echo of tension behind them. Karen lingered across the street for a few minutes after they left, taking pictures with her phone. I noticed her packing, glancing toward neighbors' windows as if she wanted an audience. Every click of her camera felt like a jab, a reminder that she thought she was winning. I went back inside, trying to shake off the frustration. I poured another cup of coffee and stared out the window, wondering how someone could care so much about a patch of concrete. Then it hit me. This wasn't about the driveway. It was about control, power, ego, and Karen was about to make sure I felt the full weight of both. By the time evening rolled around, I could hear the faint tapping of her heels on the pavement across the street. And then, just before dinner, the mailbox rattled. A thick envelope with the HOA logo stared back at me. My hands hesitated for a second before opening it. I knew this wasn't going to be friendly, and I was right. Inside was a fine, a warning, a threat. Every word written to remind me that Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. And that's when I realized something very important. What started with a driveway, a police visit, and a clipboard was about to become something far bigger than either of us expected. The morning light barely crept through the blinds when I tore open the envelope from the HOA. My stomach sank the moment I read the first line. It wasn't a friendly reminder. It wasn't a polite warning. It was a declaration of war, wrapped in official-looking paper with the HOA logo stamped in bold. Karen's handwriting, crisp, accusing, infuriating, seared across the page. The letter claimed my driveway violated several HOA codes. Not only that, but I was now officially fined, $50 a day, retroactive to the day she called the police. And if I didn't remove the offending section immediately, the fines would increase and legal action could follow. Every word seemed designed to provoke. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee long gone cold, rereading the lines over and over. My driveway, my property. And yet, according to Karen, it belonged to the HOA now. I wanted to laugh, but the laugh wouldn't come. This was absurd. And yet a part of me knew Karen wouldn't stop here. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to humiliate me, and she'd chosen her battlefield carefully, my own home. The next day I stepped outside, intending to ignore her, but she was already there. Across the street, phone in hand, her eyes flicking toward my house like a hawk. She was taking pictures, probably texting them to the HOA group chat, eager to announce her victory to anyone who would listen. I watched her packing back and forth, heels clicking against the pavement, and I realized something. She thought this was all a game, and she was winning. I took a deep breath and went over. "Morning, Karen," I said, voice calm but firm. "I got your letter." Her smile was all teeth and confidence. "I see you received it. Good. You'll want to comply, of course. The rules are there for a reason." "Sure," I said. "I'll read it carefully, but I'm not sure I understand how a patch of my own driveway can be illegal." She blinked just for a moment, a tiny flicker of uncertainty. But then she straightened, posture perfect, clipboard raised like a shield. "The HOA rules are clear. You must act immediately or there will be consequences." I wanted to ask her who she thought she was, but I bit back the words. That's exactly what she wanted, to get a reaction. Instead, I nodded politely and walked back inside. The rest of the day, I noticed neighbors glancing from their windows, whispering behind curtains. Karen had already started her campaign of public shamming. She was making a show of me, painting me as the rule breaker who refused to follow the community's sacred codes. Each glance felt like another layer of pressure, but I refused to let it get under my skin. By afternoon, I had a plan. I wasn't going to argue on the street, post passive-aggressive replies in the HOA chat, or threaten to call my own lawyers yet. No, I would let her move, let her escalate, and watch as she underestimated the wrong person. But Karen wasn't done. Just as I was about to step outside for a breath of fresh air, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine slowing. My heart sank. 2 police officers pulled into the driveway again. I rubbed my temples, knowing exactly what this meant. Karen had called them again. They approached cautiously this time, slightly wary. I explained calmly that nothing had changed. The driveway remained exactly as it was. The first officer, the one who seemed a little more experienced, raised an eyebrow at the paperwork Karen had submitted. "Ma'am, these complaints, do you have proof?" Karen's voice faltered slightly. She stammered, tried to regain control, but the officer's gaze held her accountable in a way she clearly wasn't used to. I could see the panic building. For the first time, Karen wasn't in charge. I stood back, silent, letting her squirm. Inside, I felt a mixture of amusement and anticipation. This was her game, but now she had opened a door she wasn't prepared to walk through, and I had no intention of letting her know what I was about to do next. By the time the officers left, Karen's expression was carefully neutral, but I could tell the gears were turning behind her eyes. She was thinking, plotting, scheming, and I realized something chilling. This was only the beginning. The fine, the HOA letter, the police visits. All of it was just the opening act in a story that Karen thought she was writing, but the pen was in my hands whether she knew it or not. And as I watched her retreat across the street, phone still in hand, snapping pictures and muttering under her breath, I knew one thing for certain. She had no idea how this was about to end. By the 3rd day, I was beginning to understand exactly how far Karen would go. It wasn't enough that she had sent fines, letters, and called the police twice. No, she had to make a spectacle out of me, and apparently the more witnesses, the better. I stepped outside that morning to find her standing on the edge of the street again, phone glued to her hand, filming as if she were preparing a documentary about my crime. I could hear her muttering about violations, codes, and bylaws, and each time she glanced at me, I felt the weight of her judgment, as though she had the right to tell me who I could be in my own home. The first officer from her previous visit happened to be nearby, making a routine patrol, and he slowed when he saw the tension. I could feel Karen stiffen immediately, realizing she wasn't quite in control of the scene anymore. She waved at him, attempting her usual "I'm the law-abiding citizen and he's the rebel" routine. But the officer raised an eyebrow and kept driving slowly past, which sent a subtle shiver of panic across her face. I knew she wanted me to confront her, to lose my temper, to hand her a victory, but I didn't. I stayed calm, my hands in my pockets, my expression neutral. Every time she tried to shout across the street, I simply nodded, silent. I could almost hear her frustration boiling under the surface. Then came the knock. My door shook slightly under the force of her persistence. I opened it to find Karen herself, leaning forward, pointing at the driveway like it had personally offended her. "Do you even understand the rules?" she snapped. Her voice had that sharp edge it always did when she wanted to intimidate, but there was a subtle tremor beneath it, panic masquerading as confidence. "I understand them perfectly," I replied evenly. "You're just interpreting them in your own way." Her eyes narrowed. "Your driveway is a danger. You're obstructing access, and if you don't fix it immediately—" I cut her off. "If you don't leave immediately, I'll call the police myself." Her mouth opened, then closed. She blinked, clearly not expecting me to stand my ground. That's when I realized something vital. She had never encountered anyone willing to resist her theatrics calmly, without raising their voice, without anger. She thrived on reactions. I wasn't giving her any. Karen tried another approach. She leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper that she probably thought sounded threatening. "You're making this difficult. Everyone will know you refuse to follow the rules. You'll be shamed at the HOA meeting. Your neighbors will." "Karen," I interrupted, voice calm but firm, "I'm not afraid of your threats, and neither should anyone else be." She straightened quickly, trying to regain composure, and muttered something about legal escalation, but it sounded hollow. She could feel it too. The control she thought she had was slipping. As she stormed off across the street, muttering under her breath, I noticed a neighbor peeking from behind a curtain. She witnessed the exchange, and I could see the shift in their perception. Karen's mask of authority was cracking. She was no longer the queen of the street. She was a woman frantically trying to assert dominance and failing. I stepped back inside, letting the tension settle for a moment, but my mind was already racing. Every step she took now, every message she sent, every call to the HOA or the police would be documented. I wasn't just defending my driveway anymore. I was preparing for the moment when Karen's overconfidence would be her undoing. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I opened it carefully and froze. It was a copy of the latest HOA complaint, detailing everything Karen had reported, complete with photos she had taken herself. She had no idea that by documenting every move, she had already started building a case against herself. And as I stared at the photos, a small, satisfied smile crept onto my face. Karen thought she had the upper hand. She thought I would be intimidated, shamed, or forced into submission. She had no idea that every step she took was leading her closer to the very consequences she had spent so long threatening me with. That night, I went to bed knowing one thing: Karen's next move would be her most desperate yet, and when it came, I'd be ready. By the next morning, I could feel it in the air. Something had shifted. Karen wasn't just angry anymore, she was desperate. I could tell from the way she paced back and forth across the street, phone constantly in her hand, muttering under her breath. Her smirk from the previous days had disappeared, replaced by a tight, brittle smile that screamed panic disguised as authority. I stepped outside cautiously, pretending to stretch, sipping my coffee. Karen immediately noticed me. Her eyes narrowed and she waved her phone, clearly recording, as if the entire neighborhood needed to witness her next performance. "Good morning," I called, voice light, almost cheerful. "Another beautiful day for driveway violations, isn't it?" Her glare could have cut through steel. "This isn't over," she snapped. "You're in violation and I won't let you get away with this." I leaned on the railing, smiling faintly. "I see, so you called the police again, right?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't need to explain myself to you." That's when the first police knock came. I froze for a moment, my heart skipping. Two officers, familiar now, approached the door. I opened it slowly, and the first thing I noticed was the skeptical look on their faces as they glanced at Karen standing across the street, waving frantically. The officer who had been polite but cautious on the first visit stepped forward. "Sir, we received another complaint." "Yes," Karen interrupted, pointing at me dramatically. He's violating HOA codes again, blocking access, refusing to comply." I stayed silent, just stared. The officers exchanged glances, and I could feel Karen's confidence crack under their scrutiny. "Ma'am," the officer said, voice measured, "we've been here twice before. Can you show us exactly what the violation is?" Karen stammered. She fumbled with her phone, flipping through photos she had taken herself. Her voice wavered. It's the driveway." The officer sighed, a mix of patience and disbelief. "The driveway is exactly the same as yesterday. There's nothing obstructing anyone. You do realize that, right?" Her eyes widened slightly. "But—" "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "if there's no obstruction, no violation, and no imminent danger, then our investigation ends here." Karen's face drained of color. For a moment she looked like a child caught in the act of lying. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone. I couldn't help the small smile that crept across my face. Finally, the first real crack in her armor. But I knew better than to think this was over. Karen thrived on persistence, and now, having been humiliated in front of the police, she would find another way to assert herself. As the officers left, I noticed something that made my blood run cold for just a second. Karen's eyes lingered on me, not with fear, not with anger, but with calculation. She was thinking, planning, desperate to regain the control she had lost. And I knew whatever came next would be bigger, more intense, more dangerous. I went back inside, my mind racing. Every move she made was predictable now. She had overplayed her hand. Each complaint, each call to the police, each threat, all of it was documented. And that documentation was my silent weapon. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to argue. Every false claim she had filed, every exaggeration she had made was evidence. Later that evening, the mailbox rattled again. My stomach sank. Another envelope from the HOA. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, half expecting some new fine, some new threat. But this one was different. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Karen. She had just received her first real taste of consequences, an official summons from my office. My office. The place she could never intimidate, the place where rules mattered more than ego. I couldn't help but smile as I imagined her reading it. The letter spelled out the seriousness of false reports, misuse of emergency services, and potential legal repercussions. Her power, which she had wielded so casually over me, had just turned against her. That night I sat on my porch, looking at my driveway, the very same driveway that had started all this chaos. I sipped my coffee, letting the satisfaction settle in. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought she controlled the street, the HOA, and the narrative. She had no idea that her next step would take her into territory she could never command. And as I watched the last rays of sun disappear behind the trees, I realized something important. Karen had underestimated me, and underestimating me was a mistake she was about to regret. I never imagined I'd see the day Karen would actually show up at my office. She had spent weeks wielding her HOA authority like a weapon, calling police, issuing fines, and making a public spectacle of me over a driveway. And now, the irony was delicious. She was the one being summoned. The morning was unusually quiet when she arrived. I watched from behind the blinds as she pulled up in her sedan, clutching her handbag and the stack of papers she clearly thought would intimidate me. But this time, the playing field had changed. This wasn't her street, her neighborhood, or her HOA. This was my domain, my command office, where rules weren't suggestions and authority wasn't performative. When she stepped inside, I noticed how stiff she was. Every step sounded exaggerated, deliberate, as if she was trying to appear confident. Her smile was forced. She held her clipboard like a shield and muttered greetings, but her voice lacked conviction. "Good morning, Karen," I said, keeping my tone calm, almost casual. "I hope your journey was enlightening." Her lips pressed together. "Ib received your summons. I understand we need to talk about the HOA matter." "Yes," I said, gesturing toward a chair. Please have a seat." She hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt. She had never been in a room where someone else controlled the narrative, where she didn't set the rules, where she couldn't manipulate witnesses or intimidate others. She was uncomfortable, and she knew it. I pulled out the stack of documents I had prepared, each one detailing every complaint she had filed against me, every phone call to the police, every exaggeration she had made. I placed them on the table, spreading them in front of her like a map of her missteps. Her eyes widened, scanning the papers, her perfectly controlled demeanor starting to crack. She opened her mouth, tried to explain herself, but the words faltered. I was just following procedure," she stammered. "Following procedure?" I repeated, voice calm but deliberate. "You called police on your neighbor repeatedly, filed false complaints, and created a public spectacle over something that was never an issue. That's what you call following procedure." Her hands shook slightly as she clutched her clipboard. "I didn't mean any harm," she said, the confidence draining from her words. I leaned back in my chair and watched her. She had spent weeks trying to control me, trying to assert power over my life, and now, in the quiet authority of my office, she had nothing. No audience, no allies, no performance, just facts, just accountability. The silence stretched for a moment, heavy, almost suffocating. Then I spoke again, slowly letting each word land. "Karen, your actions have consequences. False reports, misuse of emergency services, and harassment are not just HOA matters. They are legal matters. You've crossed a line, and it's one you can't just erase with apologies or excuses." Her face went pale. She swallowed hard, realizing for the first time that this wasn't a bluff. She had overstepped, and there was no going back. "I didn't think it would go this far," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to enforce the rules." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "And in doing so, you've shown exactly why rules are meant to protect everyone, not empower someone to control others. Today, you are here because you need to understand that accountability exists beyond your street, beyond the HOA, and beyond your comfort zone." She shifted in her seat, silent now, eyes darting between me and the stack of papers. For the first time, the woman who had terrorized our little neighborhood was quiet, afraid, unsure, stripped of her performative authority. And in that silence, I felt the tension settle in my chest, a mix of satisfaction and relief. The driveway had sparked this chain of events, but this moment, was the real turning point. Karen had finally realized she was no longer in charge. As I stood to conclude the meeting, I said softly, almost kindly, "The choice is yours. Accept the consequences and learn, or continue down this path and face further action. The decision is yours." Her shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of her. The smirk was gone, the intimidation gone, replaced with the quiet understanding that she had miscalculated. She had stepped into my office thinking she was summoning me. Instead, she had been summoned herself, and for the first time, she understood that power wasn't hers to wield recklessly. As she left, I couldn't help but glance at the driveway, now peaceful and untouched, and think to myself, sometimes the longest battles are fought quietly, with patience, and in the right setting. And I knew this was only the beginning of Karen learning what it really meant to cross the wrong person. Karen didn't come back the next day, or the day after. I could see her lurking from across the street, packing nervously, phone in hand. But she didn't approach. It was almost amusing, seeing someone so used to controlling others reduced to watching from a distance, unsure of their next step. But I knew better than to underestimate her. Karen had a way of escalating things when she felt cornered, and cornered she clearly was. By mid-morning, the HOA board members were on my front porch, or at least a few of them cautiously. They had received word of Karen's summons to my office. The story was spreading, and I could see the subtle shift in their attitudes. No longer was Karen the untouchable president dictating every rule. She was a woman being held accountable, and the board members couldn't help but notice. Then the phone rang. It was Karen. She didn't waste words. "I received your summons. I want to resolve this," she stammered. Her voice wavered, betraying the panic I could see in her eyes even over the line. "Of course," I said calmly. "I'll meet you, but understand, this isn't about intimidation or threats or fines anymore. It's about accountability. The choices you've made have consequences, Karen. Your false reports, your harassment, and misuse of authority cannot go unchecked. There was a pause, then she spoke, voice barely audible. I understand, I just did. I know what you didn't, I interrupted gently. You didn't think anyone would stand up to you. You didn't think anyone would challenge you in your own game, and that's exactly why you're here. She didn't respond. I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick. For once, the woman who had dictated the lives of others was silent, realizing that she was no longer in control. I arranged for her to meet with me in my office later that afternoon. When she arrived, she walked slowly, hesitant, clutching her stack of papers like armor. But this time there was no smirk, no forced confidence, just anxiety and the faint glimmer of fear. I gestured toward a chair and she sat, shifting nervously. I could see her scanning the room, hopping perhaps for some friendly face, some ally. But this was my domain. The walls held no bias, no loyalty to her ego. Everything here was documented, professional, and immutable. I laid out the evidence once more. Every complaint she had filed, every call to the police, every attempt to humiliate me, every exaggeration she had submitted as proof. I could see the color drain from her face as she realized the full weight of what she had done. Karen, I said softly but firmly, this isn't about revenge. It's about showing you that the actions you take, especially when you have power over others, carry consequences, and yours have caught up to you. Her hands trembled as she reached for her clipboard. I didn't think it would get this far. I just wanted to enforce the rules. You enforced nothing, I said. You misused authority, you created chaos, and now you're facing the reality that your actions matter more than your ego. The silence stretched. I could see the shift inside her, realization settling in. The woman who had once towered over the neighborhood, issuing fines and commanding obedience, now sat quietly, absorbing the consequences she had ignored for so long. I leaned back in my chair and watched her, the tension heavy but satisfying. Finally, she spoke, voice low and hesitant. I understand what happens now. That depends on you, I said. You can accept accountability, comply with the requirements, and learn, or you can resist, escalate, and face further consequences. The choice is yours. Her shoulders slumped. The fight was gone. The arrogance, the bluster, the ego, all replaced by the quiet understanding that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. As she left my office, I watched her disappear down the hallway, a defeated figure. The driveway outside my home, the very same driveway she had tried to control me over, was peaceful once again. The chaos had ended, not with loud confrontation, but with quiet, undeniable authority. And as I stepped outside, feeling the morning sun on my face, I realized something important. Some battles aren't won with anger, shouting, or proving a point. They're won with patience, planning, and letting consequences speak louder than words ever could. Karen had finally learned what it meant to underestimate someone, and that lesson had just begun. The following morning, I could feel it in the air. Karen was desperate, not angry, not smug, but raw, trembling desperation. She had spent weeks thinking she was untouchable, believing she could command obedience with a clipboard and a loud voice. But now, the reality had hit her. She had miscalculated. She had pushed too far, and she had no plan for what came next. I watched from my porch as she approached my driveway, her steps hesitant, almost apologetic, yet there was still a spark of that old arrogance lurking in her eyes. She wasn't just here to talk. She was trying to find a way to save face. Karen, I said, stepping toward her, we need to finish this. It's time you understand what accountability really looks like. She swallowed hard. I want to resolve this, she stammered. Please, I didn't mean for any of this to go so far. I studied her carefully. Every gesture, every blink, every falter in her voice told me she was calculating, weighing her options. And that's when I knew she was capable of one last desperate move. Karen, I continued, calm but firm, everything that's happened, the complaints, the fines, the police visits, can either end here or it can escalate. The choice is yours. What do you want it to be? Her hands clenched at her sides. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Pride screamed at her to fight, to argue, to assert control, but fear whispered that she had already lost. I waited, letting the silence stretch, pressing her without words. Finally, she spoke, voice barely audible. "I can't undo what I did. I understand now." I nodded slowly. "Good. Understanding is the first step. Compliance is the next. Every false report, every attempt to manipulate the situation has consequences. Today you accept them, or you will face further action." Her eyes dropped. She didn't argue. She didn't resist. For the first time, the woman who had terrorized our neighborhood over a driveway realized she was powerless. She had walked into my world thinking she could intimidate me, and instead she had been confronted with the truth of her actions. And then it happened, the subtle, satisfying moment I had been waiting for. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it nervously, a message from the HOA board. "We've reviewed the complaints. Further action will be taken. You will need to cooperate fully with the process." Karen's face went white. The reality of what she had triggered, the investigation, the scrutiny, the accountability was sinking in. Her arrogance, her false sense of control had led her here, and now she had nowhere to hide. I took a deep breath. "Karen, you need to understand, power isn't about intimidation. It's about responsibility. Every action has a reaction and every choice has consequences. You've had plenty of time to see what happens when you abuse authority. Don't waste this lesson." She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "I understand. I'll cooperate. I won't overstep again." I watched as she left, shoulders slumped, defeated but intact. Not broken entirely, but humbled, reminded that the world does not bend to ego and bluster. As she disappeared down the street, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. The driveway, the complaints, the fines, it was never really about concrete. It was about patience, about standing firm, and about letting someone realize the consequences of their actions in a way that no amount of shouting or power posturing could ever teach. The sun hit the driveway, warm and peaceful just as it had before this entire ordeal began. But now everything had changed. Karen's control had vanished. My home, my property, my peace, it had been restored. And the neighborhood had watched it all unfold, learning a lesson in humility and respect along the way. And as I walked inside, closing the door behind me, I realized the longest battles are often the quietest. They don't rely on yelling, threats, or drama. They rely on patience, intelligence, and the unwavering belief that truth and justice have a way of catching up. Karen had finally reached her breaking point, and when the dust settled, everyone knew exactly who had won, not through rage, but through resolve. It was quiet that morning, too quiet. No heels clicking across the street, no frantic phone calls, no HOA letters stacked in my mailbox. The neighborhood had watched, whispered, and waited for the next move, but there was none. Karen, finally humbled, had disappeared behind the walls of accountability she had ignored for so long. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and let the morning sun wash over the driveway that had started all of this. It was still mine, untouched, peaceful, and in that quiet moment I realized just how much had happened in such a short time. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Police visits, letters, fines, public shamming attempts, and endless tension. Karen had tried everything to intimidate me, to make me bend to her whims, to assert control over a patch of concrete that belonged to me. And yet here I was, standing tall, calm, and victorious, not through anger, not through shouting, but through patience, planning, and unwavering resolve. The neighbors had noticed, too. I saw Mrs. Thompson across the street tending to her garden, sneaking glances at me with a mixture of relief and admiration. Mr. Rivera waved as he walked his dog, a small smile of acknowledgement. Even those who had remained silent during Karen's reign seemed to understand. The balance of power had shifted. I took a deep breath and leaned on the railing, thinking back to the first day Karen had called the police over my driveway. I remembered her smug grin, her false confidence, the way she thought she could dictate my life. And I remembered the calm I had maintained, the plan I had quietly executed, and the satisfaction of letting the consequences speak louder than words ever could. By mid-morning, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find a representative from the HOA, someone neutral, professional, and decidedly less intimidating than Karen had ever been. "Sir," he said, voice calm and respectful, "we've reviewed the complaints. The board acknowledges that your property is fully compliant. Ms. Karen will no longer be filing further reports regarding your driveway. We apologize for any inconvenience or stress caused. I smiled politely, letting the weight of those words sink in. Finally, validation, not because I needed it, but because it confirmed that the truth had prevailed. "Thank you," I said, keeping my tone measured. "I appreciate that." As he left, I walked to the driveway and ran my hand along the edge, the familiar smooth surface grounding me. It had been a battlefield, a stage for ego, and a test of patience. And now it was just a driveway again, mine, peaceful and undisturbed. Later that afternoon, I caught a glimpse of Karen from my window. She was across the street, walking slowly, head lowered, clearly humbled. I didn't need to say anything, and she didn't look at me. The street, the neighborhood, and my home were mine again. The lesson had been learned. I went back inside, poured another cup of coffee, and sat on my porch. The golden light of the afternoon sun bathed everything in warmth. For the first time in weeks, I felt the kind of calm that comes after storms pass and battles are quietly won. I knew this wasn't just about a driveway. It was about understanding boundaries, the difference between authority and ego, and the importance of standing firm without losing composure. Karen had taught me something, too, how persistence, patience, and intelligence could triumph over bluster and arrogance. And as I looked down the quiet street, I realized something else. Some victories aren't loud, dramatic, or flashy. Some victories are subtle. They're felt in the calm after chaos, in the peace restored to a home, in the quiet acknowledgement that the right choices have consequences, and that those who overstep must eventually face them. The driveway remained untouched. The sun continued to shine, and for the first time in weeks, I could truly breathe. The neighborhood had witnessed a small battle with a big lesson, and I knew, deep down, that Karen would think twice before ever trying to control someone else again. Because some lessons aren't learned with words, rules, or fines. They're learned with patience, resolve, and letting the truth do its work. And this time, the truth had won. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.